Page.
It's 16b3. That's Tez Zion Amud Base.
Okay, 3.
Yeah, it's a few lines down from the 2 dots. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down from the 2 dots. Amar of Shemen Bar Abba. That's what I'd like to start from. Any questions or any comments left over from yesterday?
No.
No, all good. Baruch Hashem.
Okay, Amar of Shemen.
Yeah, Amar of Shemen.
Strange name.
Yeah, it's actually the first time I'm seeing this name in the Gemara. I haven't seen this in another Gemara. Only here in Chagiga. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but
maybe it was supposed to be Shimon.
yeah, maybe. But if it was supposed to be Shimon, you'd have the Hagos Habach and to tell us that this was what this was. But you know, while we're waiting for a few more people to come in, maybe I'll just look up who was this guy, Rav Shimon Bar Abba. 1 second. Shemen Bar Abba. Let's see. Oh, well, we have him in Brachis.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we have him in Brachis. And we also have him in Maseches Rosh Hashanah. He's also in Yavamis, and he's also in Sanhedrin and Megillah. So he is mentioned a few times. Definitely not very common, but he's there. He's there in a few other places. And I'll tell you.
The name is not as important as what they say.
There you go. Although they say Shemen Tov Oila Gabein, that having a good name, that's more important than everything.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few times he mentions things in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Anyway, interesting. Okay. Wow. I'm not sure where everybody is today. Maybe they all got locked out. So what we're going to do is we're going to start, because a time is a time, and there's no read. If need be, we'll go back. And but since anyway, I wanted to start a little bit earlier. We learned this Gemara before yesterday, so we'll start from this Gemara over here. So we're going to start from Amar of Shemen. You have it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it says Amar of Shemen Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yechanan. We're starting from Amar of Shemen Bar Abba. That's 5 lines down from the two dots. We did this yesterday, but it's the beginning of an issue, and it's easier to flow from there. So Rav Shemen said in the name Shemen Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, La'olam al teishvus kalabeinecha. Never let a rabbinic prohibition concerning Shabbos or Yom Tov seem minor to you. Shaharei, since smicha eina elamashum shvus. This whole issue that we mentioned in the Mishnah about the disputes between the two pairs, which means the Nasi and the Avbestin, during the course of many generations, was all with regards to a shvus. It was all with regards to a rabbinic prohibition about using an animal. And the greatest of the generation disputed about it with each other, which shows how important this is. Frank the Gemara, Pshita, isn't this obvious? Why do I need Rabbi Yechanan to come and tell me this? I mean, we could know this ourselves. We could see the Mishnah, and we could see that they're arguing over this shavus with regards to smicha. And for the Gemara, no, maybe what he's coming to tell you is shvus mitzvah. It's richnalei. That he needs to tell us that there are rabbinic prohibitions concerning the Shabbos that forbid things that are even a mitzvah, and that's what you have to realize is still important. That a shvus of the Chachamim can even override a mitzvah because of this particular shvus. Right? The Gemara, Hanami Pshita, isn't this also obvious? In other words, we could see in the Mishnah that we're talking about a mitzvah of smicha, and nevertheless, there's a shvus not to do it. So why do I need to know from Rabbi Yechanan this thing that what they're arguing about is a shvus, and this teaches me the importance of being careful with rabbinic prohibitions. So he says it's coming to teach me lafuke mimad oma smicha gufa pligi. That's coming. Rabbi Yechanan's statement is coming to negate the view that holds that the machlekes that we have between the different generations of the Nasiim and the Av Bezdins was about whether you do smicha altogether or not because of a shvus, but whether or not you needed to have smicha at all. Kamash malon, b'shvus hu depligi. So Rabbi Yechanan is coming along to teach us that no, the machlekes is really about whether or not the shvus is taken into account or not, and not whether there was a machlekes between whether you do smicha altogether. Okay, that's what we learned yesterday. The reason why I'm learning it again today is because we need to bear in mind what Rabbi Yechanan taught. Okay, Rabbi Yechanan taught that that the issue of smicha that they were disputing in our Mishnah is with regards to the shvus of the Chachamim, not to lean or not to use an animal. Okay. Now, Rami Bachama says, again, this is Daf Tezayin, I'm at the base towards the bottom. Rami Bachama says, Shema Mina. So we hear from this, that Smicha B'Kol Va'inan, from the fact that Rabbi Yechanan came along and said that Smicha has to be done. From the fact that Rabbi Yechanan says that the machlekes of the Chachamim is a shvus d'Rabbanan, so therefore we can conclude from this that the smicha has to be done with all of one's force. What does that mean? It means like this: when a person did the smicha, right, when they leaned on the animal, they had to lean with their whole body force, because that's considered to be the smicha on the animal. If a person didn't put all their weight on it, then that's not considered smicha. Now, how are we trying to prove this? What's Rami Bachama learning from Rabbi Yechanan? He's trying to say, how do we know we need to put your full force on to the animal from the fact that Rabbi Yechanan tells us that it's a shvus. It's a rabbinic prohibition to lean with all your strength on an animal, because because if you're going to think that smicha does not have to be done with all of your strength, so Micah Ovid, what did you already do? When somebody who does smicha and he's not putting all his weight on the body, he's just basically touching the animal, what's the problem? There's no shvus over here. Lismach, let him perform the smicha on Yom Tov without pressing down hard, and then he won't have violated any rabbinic prohibition, and everything would be fine. And so therefore, why do you need to have this whole machlekes? So since Rabbi Yechanan tells us that the whole machlekes is about a shvus, the shvus must be, and the shvus is only when you use the animal. What's the problem on Shabbos with putting your hands on an animal? Not that you touched the animal, but rather that you used it. And the using of an animal is what is the problem. And that's only if you do it at full strength. So this seems to be a proof that smicha has to be with all your strength. So it sounds like a good proof. However, now the Gemara comes and challenges this conclusion that Rami Bachama made. Frank the Gemara, Meisvei was taught in a brisa. We'll ask you a question from a brisa. It says in the pasuk, "Dabel b'nei Yisrael v'samach." Torah, when it speaks about the leaning on an animal and the process with regards to bringing up an animal, it says, "Speak to b'nei Yisrael, and they shall lean his hands on the head of the animal." Samach yodai al reish apart. Right, he should put his hands on top of the offering. So now, since it says Bnei Yisrael, the Chachamim want to come along and learn out a drasha to restrict it, that we're going to limit it to men and not women. Bnei Yisrael Seimchin, it's the men of the Jewish people that do the smicha ve'ein b'nois Yisrael soimchos. But the daughters of Israel, meaning the women, do not perform smicha on the sacrifice. Now, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yishmael, or another girsa is Rabbi Shimon, Aimrim, say that b'nois Yisrael soimchos. That the daughters of Israel have the option to do the smicha. In other words, it's not a mitzvah per se, but they're allowed to do smicha. And not just that. Rabbi Yossi said, Sachli Abba Elazar told me the following story. Pam achas hayolanu egel shel zibchei shlamim. We had the calf that was a shlamim offering. We brought it to the women's courtyard. And the women performed smicha on it. Not because that there's smicha requirement for women, that they have to do smicha before the korban. Rather, but rather it's to give satisfaction to the women, to give them a bit of nachas ruach, to feel that they're doing everything that is required for the korban. So now, what is the? Why do we bring this? What's the question on Rami Bar Chama from this? So the Gemara says, if you're going to come along and say that smicha requires that you put all of your force on and all of your weight on the animal. So now we've got a separate problem with the story that we're told about the women. Why? Because there is a prohibition in the Torah not to do any work with anything that is being consecrated for the service of the Beis Hamikdash or for an offering as a korban. So now, if I'm going to do smicha, I'm just going to mute everybody, and anybody who would like to speak, please unmute yourself. So, if I'm going to come along and I'm going to do smicha on a korban, if it's for a mitzvah, meaning to say this is part of the process of offering up the animal and I'm required to do so, then there's no problem with me putting all my weight on the animal. You know, there are certain halachas when it comes to davening where at certain parts one should not be leaning when they're davening. They should be standing up straight. The question is, what's the technical definition of leaning? The technical definition of leaning is that if you would remove whatever it is you're leaning on, you'd fall. In other words, you put all your weight, well, I don't mean you put all your weight, but like enough weight that if you remove it, right, then you would fall. Right? That's considered leaning. So here with the animal, if you are putting your weight on the animal, then the animal is standing there and is supporting you. Now, how can you use the animal as a support when you're not supposed to use anything that's been consecrated for the Beis Hamikdash or that's been designated as a korban? So when it's part of the process, that's not a problem. Why? Because that is the mitzvah. But if you're telling me that women are not obligated, right? Women are not obligated to do smicha, and yet here in the story we say that they were given the opportunity to do the smicha because you want to give them a certain sense of satisfaction, but not because they're obligated. But how could the idea of giving them satisfaction push away the prohibition of using an animal or something of kachim for your own benefit? So therefore, we're asking Elalav Shmamina, is this not a proof then that you do not need to do smicha with all of your weight? In other words, this brisa that we just mentioned seems to contradict the conclusion that Rami Bar Chama came to, that it has to be with all of your koyach. And for the Gemara, no, it's not a problem. Why? Really, I can say to you that that smicha has to be done with all of your strength. So what happened with the women? What happened with that story? No, what happened over there is the amalahu akfu yudaichu. They told them to just kind of like hover their hands, like rest their hands lightly on the animal, but not to put their weight on the animal. So just kind of because you want to do it in a way that is going to give them a certain sense that they've done what everybody else is doing. But at the same time, there is a problem of using the animal by putting all your weight on it. So they said, just put your hands lightly on it. Right? The Gemara, in the story, that's not the way it was related, that they told them to just put their hands lightly. And it seems that the brisa should have been worded differently. If so, in other words, don't come along and say that there's no smicha by the women, right? When you came along and you told me the story, what happened? That I went and I took up the carbon to the women so that they should do smicha. Don't tell me that not because there's no smicha by women, but only is to bring them satisfaction. Rather, typically the einal smicha klal. Just come along and say that it wasn't really smicha that what they were doing. In other words, the way you should tell the story is as follows. You say it like this. One time I went up, we had an egel of a zevach shlamim, and we brought it to the Ezras Noshim, and the women placed their hands upon them. However, it wasn't real smicha, and that's it. So then you don't have to come along and say loy mipnei smicha b'noshim. Just say it wasn't smicha. So Amar Rabbi Ami. So Rabbi Ami says, you're right. It's one thing and another is what Abba Elazar was saying. Chada, one thing he was telling us, the lesa l'smicha klal. One thing he was telling us that it was not true smicha at all, like you're suggesting over here. But oid, and also the last is nachas ruch l'noshim. He was telling us another thing, that even that which was done was only done in order to give satisfaction to the women, but not that they have any obligation to do smicha on the animals, and therefore we could still conclude, like Rami Bachama said, that based on what Rabbi Yechanan says, that the whole machlekes was that it was the shvus. What's the shvus? The shvus is to put all your weight on the animal, and nevertheless there was a machlekes about it, whether the smicha should be done or not. Okay. Another conclusion that we're going to learn from Rabbi Yechanan, saying that it's only a shvus, that the machlekes is based on the shvus, is Amar Papa. Papa said, Shema Mina. We can learn from here, from the fact that Rabbi Yechanan tells us that putting your hands and your whole weight on the head of the animal is a shvus. Shema Mina, we will learn from here, it's a dodin asurin, that the sides of an animal are forbidden for use on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, just like its back. Because here's the thing: the halacha is you're not allowed to ride an animal. You're not allowed to ride an animal. Okay, why? We say the reason is because you might break off a stick and you might come along and use it to guide the animal. Therefore, we say you're not allowed to ride it. Okay, but if I'm not allowed to ride it, what about any other use of the animal? So the halacha is that really you're not really supposed to have any other use of the animal because a gezerah connected to the riding. Fine. That is with regards to the back, because that's usually what we ride on. We ride on the back of the animal. But what about the side of the animal, right? And once we're talking about the side, the same thing would apply to the head. Nobody rides on the head of an animal, and nobody rides on the side of an animal. So are you allowed to use the side of the animal? So there's a machlekes about that. There's a machlekes of the Amoraim, whether or not you're allowed to use the side of an animal. So Rav Papa wants to say that since Rabbi Yechanan said over here that the whole machlekes is when we talk about putting your hands on the top of the animal is because of the shvus d'Rabbanan, let's conclude that Rabbi Yechanan is basically paskening that the halacha is that even the sides of the animal, and likewise by extension, the head of the animal, are forbidden, all for the same reason. Why? Because if you're going to come along and say that the sides are permitted, so then lismaich litzdadin, or there's another gisa which says areisha, then let it form smicha on the head of the animal. That's the point, right? Let them, and then since putting your hands on top of the head is like the side, it's not the back, and therefore it's not really, there's no prohibition, there's no rabbinic prohibition from the fact that Rabbi Yechanan says that it is a shvus, and nevertheless there's a machlekes about whether you can do it or not, right? So can we not learn from here that the sides of the animal are also forbidden? So now I just brought something from Shulchan Aruch. Let me just show you over here. Can everybody see over here? Yeah. It says over here, this is in Shulchan Aruch, Shin Hey, that's 305, 18. Ein reichvin al gabi behema. You do not ride on top of a behema. Nitlim alea, you don't hang on it. Va'afilu b'tzida also, and even the side is also lishtamish, to use. Avol tzidei tzedadin, but the sides of the sides, which means kegoyim shedava echad munach al tzida, there's something that's on its side. V'hu mishtamish boy, and you're using on something that's on its side, muta, it's permissible. Now let's look over here on the side. This is from the Mishnah Berurah. V'le'nitnim aleha, nitalim aleha. So he says like this: the kol shimush bebale chayim, any use of an animal, loloi bichlal rechiva, is all of it is included in the in riding. Va'osru, and they forbade this. Va'afil b'makom deleka lamechash, and even in a place where there's no suspicion, shema yachtich zemora, like that you will cut off a branch. Like for example in a desert, the leka zemora, that there are no branches over there. Oy l'shavshev esatinik al gav abehema, or to rub the baby on the back on the back of an animal, to amuse it. Gamkin also, it's also forbidden to lepol grabanon b'milsayu, because the rabbis didn't argue on this matter. But what we see from here is that all these things that we prohibit with regards to using the animal, it's all included in the riding. Because I'll tell you like this: there are other places and that say perhaps another reason why you shouldn't use the animal is because you have an obligation to allow your animals to rest on Shabbos, right? Whatever. So there are psukim in the Torah that tell you that your animals also have to, your animals should rest. But it seems that over here, anytime we bring it down lahalacha, right, the reason is more connected with the shvus of riding on an animal. So now we want to come along and say that maybe from Rabbi Yechanan's statement, it teaches us that even using the sides of the animal are asur. So the Gemara says, lav dafka. Not necessarily. Not necessarily can you conclude that from Rabbi Yechanan's statement alone. Rav Ashi says, "Afila tema tzedadin mutarin." You could even say that the side of the animal is permitted for use on Yom Tiv, but the head is different. Why? Because called the bahade gaba kigabadami. Anything that's on the same level as the back is treated as the same as the back. So, as you see in Rashi, right, we went over to Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, the beginning of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. The bahade goiva sheshava legoiva hagav shel behema, because it's equal to the height of the back of the animal, and so therefore, since the head is equal to the back, that's why we would prohibit it. And you cannot derive from Rabbi Yechanan's statement. You cannot derive from Rabbi Yechanan's statement that the sides of the animal are forbidden, but the head is forbidden because it's the same height as the back. That is the end of this shtickle Gemara, and now we are at the Mishnah, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Any questions before we go on? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself if you wanted to ask anything.
Yeah, what's the difference between the side of the animal and the side of the side?
So the side of the side means that, at the same time, when they made the takana not to ride an animal, they also said not to climb a tree, right? You're not allowed to use a tree. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a
I
halacha.
didn't see that they said not allowed to break a branch or something.
Right. No. But I'm telling you something else now. Telling you that in the Mishnah, where it talks about not riding on an animal, it also says about using a tree, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, when it comes to using a tree, not many people are aware, but you're not allowed to lean on a tree on Shabbos, okay? So if you're walking down the street and you're tired, you're not allowed to stop and rest on a tree. It's not allowed.
Even if you want to fix your shoe.
You're not on a tree. You're not supposed to use a tree.
Okay.
Now, what about a hammock? If you want to put a hammock on a tree, it's also not allowed because you're using the sides of a tree. But what happens if you put in a nail or a screw or a hook into the tree? So now that hook's there already. And then you hang the hammock on the hook. That's called the side of the side. And that's permitted. Now, the same thing with an animal. If you have something on the side of the animal, and then you're using the side of the side, in other words, you're using that side, you're not using directly the side of the animal, then it's okay. So that's
but
the difference.
there's nothing on the side of the animal unless it's also over the back of the animal.
No, I understand that. But
You cannot have something attached to the side of the animal.
We're saying that if there is something attached to the side of the animal, then that which is attached to it you can use, but you cannot use the side of the behemoth itself. Okay.
I can't think of something, but
all right. I guess nowadays with belts, you can do all kinds of things.
What about saddlebags?
Saddlebags. So
that's what I'm saying. That's over the back of the animal.
No, I understand that, but the question is, the saddleback, right? Although it's hanging on the back of the animal, right?
Yeah.
If you're putting on the side
against it, it's definitely on the side, right? So I'm not sure. It's a good question. Can you put something against a saddlebag of an animal? I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'll look into it. Let me just write this down. Okay.
But for sure, you could not put something inside the saddlebag.
Right, because that's directly putting weight on. That's directly using the back of the animal. Yeah. Let me look into it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, moving along, we're going back to discuss the karbanos that were brought on Yom Tov. And now let's just remember for a minute, quick review on the karbanos that was supposed to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash when it came to Yom Tov. You have 3 karbanos, okay? 3 karbanos. One was the karban re'iyah, that it says that when you come to the Beis Hamikdash, that you shouldn't come and see Hashem empty-handed, which means that you have to bring a karban re'iyah. That karban re'iyah was an oila, okay? That was an oila karban, oila. What does it mean that when you have an oila? It means that everything goes on the mizbeach, right? You don't eat anything of an oila. Nobody eats anything of an oila. Then you have the karban shlamim. Now, a shlamim was a peace offering that was brought, and there was a part given to the kohen that was the breast and the l'chaim. We'll give that's like I think the left side was given to the kohen. The emurim, the innards were put on the mizbech, but the rest was eaten by the owner. And then you have shalmi simcha, and that was the karbanos that you would bring up. Also, I think they were also shlamim, but they were brought up in order to enjoy Yom Tov. Every day of Yom Tov, you could bring up a shlamim to partake of the meat of it. Now, why is that important? Because that's important with regards to a dispute in the Mishnah about what we do and what we don't do on Yom Tov. So let's now look inside and read the Mishnah. Shammai say, Meviim shlamim ve'ein seimchin aleihen. You can bring a shlamim, but you cannot do smicha on them on Yom Tov. If you remember the last Mishnah, we had the machlekes between all the different pairs. So Shammai in that Mishnah was of the opinion that you cannot do smicha on them. Why? Because as Rashi says, right? As Rashi says, if you look in the Rashi, right? There's two things to understand over here. The first thing to understand is, why can you bring up a carbon on Yom Tov, a carbon shlamim on Yom Tov? Because it says in the Torah that the things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, you're also not allowed to do on Yom Tov, besides for two things. And most of those things have to do with Eichel Nefesh, right? Eichel Nefesh, right? You're allowed to cook, and you are allowed to carry, because it has to do with Eichel Nefesh, in order to be able to enjoy Yom Tov, in order to be able to eat on Yom Tov. So anything that's associated with preparing the food for cooking is permitted. That includes shchita, and it includes cooking and so on and so forth, right? So when you bring a shlamim, which is going to be eaten by the owner of the animal and his guests, so you could do that on Yom Tov because there's achilas hedyot, right? However, you don't do smicha. So let's look in Rashi. Why, according to Beis Shammai, don't we do smicha on Yom Tov? He says kedam rinan, like we've said in the last Mishnah. We said that Beis Shammai was of the opinion that you don't do smicha. Ella, rather, what do you do? So erev Yom Tov, you can do the smicha erev Yom Tov, Yom Tov, and then you shecht it on Yom Tov. The lebi'inan takef l'smicha shchita, because according to Beis Shammai, you do not have to have the immediacy of smicha next to shchita. According to Beis Hillel, you do need to, but according to Beis Shammai, you don't need to have the smicha right before the shchita. You could do it before Yom Tov. Since you could do it before Yom Tov, so therefore you cannot do it on Yom Tov. That's according to Beis Shammai. However, he says that's only with regards to shlamim. What did we say about the shlamim? That the owners eat it. But when it comes to an oila offering, then you can't. Why can't you do it? Why can't you do it with an oila? Because the oilas you're going to have to bring after Yom Tov, right? Because when it says "Hu levadai ye'aseh lachem," only this shall be done for you. When it says lachem, Beis Shammai learns from this lachem for you, v'lo legvoya, not for Hashem. In other words, anything that you're going to do that might be a malacha, you can only do if you are going to have benefit from it. But if it's just for a karban, meaning just for Hashem, then you can't do it, right? So therefore he says, so what do you do with the oila, right? For example, the karban re'iyah itself, you'd wait till after Yom Tov, right, to do it. Why? Because you're not having any benefit on it. So that is the opinion of that's the opinion of Beis Shammai. Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah.
Okay, so Beis Hillel says, "Mevi in shlamim va'olos v'seivach aleim." According to Beis Hillel, you can bring both, side the shlamim and the oila, and you can v'seivach aleim, and you can do the smich on them, because he says that when it says "Hu levada ye'aseh lachem," this shall be done for you. He doesn't darshan v'loy legvaya. He says v'loy lavinski chav mazal. It's not for the goyim, right? In other words, you can't do it for the dogs, you can't do it for the goyim, but you can do it for yourself. Right, and you could do it for karbanis, right? He doesn't exclude karbanis from the pasuk when it says "Hu levada ye'aseh lachem." Okay, now next discussion. Aseres shechol liyes be'erev Shabbos. Aseres means Shavuos. When Shavuos falls out on Friday, right? Beis Shammai say Yom Tevoyach Achar Shabbos. The day of slaughter is after Shabbos, meaning on Sunday, which means like this: when are you going to come and bring up these karbanos? They're going to be done not on Shabbos, but they're going to be done the day after Shabbos. Not just, excuse me. Let's understand. When Yom Tov falls out on when Yom Tov falls out on Friday, right? And according to Beis Shammai, the korban re'iyah, right, the oilais cannot be brought up on Yom Tov. Certainly, they cannot be brought up on Shabbos. So what are you going to have to do instead of doing it right away, the day after Yom Tov? Because it's Shabbos, you can. So he says you push it off till Sunday. What does Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel Ein lo yom tvayach achar Shabbos. You don't have a yom tvayach after Shabbos because according to Beis Hillel, you could already bring it up on Yom Tov because according to Beis Hillel, both the shlamim, right, which is for the owner, and both the oila can all be brought up on Yom Tov. So therefore, you don't push it off to Shabbos, and then you don't have a yom tvayach on Sunday. What's so special about Shavuos? You have to understand that when it comes to the Yom Tovim, if you were not able to bring up a korban on the first day of Yom Tov, you could have what's called tashlumin. You could fulfill your obligation and make up, so to speak, for it on any of the other days of the Yom Tov, right? Shavuos is different in that there's only one day Yom Tov. So when it comes to do tashlumim, when are you going to do tashlumim? In other words, according to Beis Shammai, who says he cannot bring the eilas re'iyah on when? On the first day of Yom Tov, on Pesach, let's say, it's not such a problem. Why? Because you have tashlumim on the other days of Pesach, which are not Yom Tov, which are Chalamayit, right? And there you are able to do the malacha. But the problem for Beis Shammai is going to be on Shavuos, where there's no next day Yom Tov. And so he calls it a Yom Tovayach. This is the day that we're going to do all the karbanis that we didn't do on the first day Yom Tov. We're going to do it on this day. But when it falls out on Shabbos, then you're going to push it off to the Sunday, right? Beis Hillel says no. Beis Hillel says that we don't say Yom Tovayach on Sunday because you could bring it up on Friday. Now, Omoidim, but Beis Hillel agrees that if the Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, Yom Tovayach achar Shabbos, that the Yom Tovayach is the day after Shabbos on Sunday. However, something that is unique with regards to Shavuos that is not so with all the other Yom Tovim, and that is as follows. We know that there was a machlekes between the Chachamim and the Baitusim with regards, and the Tzdukim, with regards to when is Shavuos. Is Shavuos on Sunday or is it any day? Meaning to say, when it says that you should start counting the Omer, it says Mimochras Shabbos, the day after Shabbos. That's when you start counting the day. That's when you start counting the Omer. However, the Chachamim tell us that when it says Mimochras Shabbos, it doesn't mean the day after Shabbos. It means the day after Yom Tov. It's called in Yom Tov Shabbos, right? If we go according to the Tzdukim, that the Tzdukim come along and say that stuff we're talking about Shabbos, that you have to start counting on Matzoi Shabbos. So then Shavuos would always fall out on Sunday. It would always fall out on Sunday. And because of that, we dafka say that if it falls out, if it falls out that you have to have a Yom HaTvoich on Sunday, right? There are certain changes that are going to happen as a result. And that's what the next part of the Mishnah is about. It says, Ein kohen gadol mislabish b'keila. That on this day of Yom Tovayach, if it fell out on Sunday, he does not put on his fine clothes. In other words, according to Rashi, this means there's a machlekes between Rashi and Tosfos. According to Rashi, this means that he doesn't put on nicer garments that he would usually wear at home or in the street or anywhere that he would usually wear for Yom Tov, even though it's a special day because everybody's bringing their karbanos, right? However, if it fell out on Sunday, we want to make sure that people can know that we're not saying that today is Shavuos like the Tzedekим, okay? Umutorin behesped overtainis, and even though people are bringing up these carbonates, and it's really a special day, but when it falls out on Sunday, then we say that people are permitted to give a eulogy, and they're able to fast on that day. Why? This is in order not to uphold the words of those who say that Shavuos is always on the day after Shabbos on Sunday. So that is what the Mishnah is coming. That's what the Mishnah tells us. Yep. So far, so good. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So now let's go to the Gemara. Right, the Gemara, Amar Rebbe Elazar, Amar Rebbe Yishia. Rebbe Elazar said the name of Rebbe Yishia, Minayin Latzeres, Sheyesh Lo Tashlumin Kol Shiva. Where do you know, from where do you know that Shavuos, you're able to have this compensation for all 7 days, like by the other Yom Tovim? How do you know this? Shenema, so he says, we learn it from a pasuk. It says in the pasuk, Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, that when it talks about the 3 times a year that you should come before Hashem, it says the Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, and Chag HaSukkos. So Makish Chag Shavuos leChag Matzos. We see that Shavuos comes right after Chag HaMatzos. So now, just like when it comes to the Yom Tov of Pesach, you're able to do the Tashlumin and bring up the offerings all 7 days. Of Chag HaShavuos, yesh lo Tashlumin kol shiva. So too, when it comes to Shavuos, you can have the compensation for all of the 7 days that follow Shavuos. Which is why, by the way, you'll notice that we don't say Tachnun, right? Until Yud Beis Sivan, till after Yud Beis Sivan, because of these 7 days of Tashlumin, right? Because these have the Yemei Tashlumin like the other Yomim Tovim. Now, somebody might ask, when we say about Pesach, right, that it has 7 days of Tashlumin, it seems to be incorrect. Why? Because in Eretz Yisrael, there's only 7 days. The first day is the mitzvah, right? So it should say it has all 6 days of Tashlumin, right? The first day is not Tashlumin. So why do we call it this all 7 days? Why do we say all 7 days have Tashlumin? So there's an interesting explanation given by the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he says that the truth is that the mitzvah to bring up your korban is first thing in the morning. And it should be zrizim makdim in the mitzvahs. Now, if you didn't do it first thing in the morning, then the rest of the day is, in a way, considered to be tashlumin. In other words, compensation, completing that which you hadn't done in the best possible way, which would have been first thing in the morning. That's the way the Rebbe explains it. If somebody else has another explanation as to why it says 7 days tashlumin instead of 6, I'm happy to hear. That's what I found. Okay, so now the Gemara asks a question. If you'll notice, it says in the pasuk Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, and Chag HaSukkos. So why are you choosing to learn from Pesach and not from Sukkos, which is on the other side? What would be the difference? You'll see in the Gemara. The Gemara, maybe we should learn it out not from Pesach but from Sukkos. And what would you learn out? Just as Sukkot has the tashlumin that you could do all 8 days, not 7 days. So too, the festival of Shavuos should have not 7 days, but rather 8 days. Right? That's the original question of the Gemara. So the Gemara answers, Shmini regel b'fnei atzmehu. The truth is, Shmini Atzeres is an independent yontif, and so therefore, even on Sukkot, you can only have 7 days in total, not 8 days, to complete bringing the korban if you were not able to bring it on the first day. Okay, right? The Gemara, Ema the Amri Shmini regel b'fnei atzmehu. Sorry. Amor. Don't we say that the Amri Shmini Regel B'fnei Atzmai, that when we say that Shmini is a Yom Tov on its own, it's only with regards to specific things. You cannot say that Shmini Atzeres is a Regel B'fnei Atzmai about everything, because the Chachamim already taught us that there are a couple of things, six things in particular, where we say that Shmini Atzeres is a Regel B'fnei Atzmai. And what are those things? Hanim Milei Le'inyan Adar Kshav. When do we say that it's an independent yontiv? Only when it comes to the six things that are indicated by the mnemonic of Pzar Kshav. What are those six things? So Rashi tells us what they are. The first thing, the pay, is the pious, which is lottery, which means to say that there was a special lottery that took place in addition to the lottery that took place on Sukkot. There was an additional lottery that took place on Shmini Atzeres to divide with which mishmaros, which groups of Kohanim would bring up the different karbanos. Zman is that you make an extra bracha of Shechianu. Regel is that it's called a separate Yom Tov. Like, for example, when we bench, we say B'yom Shmini Atzeres. Chagazeh, it's given a different name. It's not called Sukkot, it's called Shmini Atzeres. Karban is with regards to the Musaf offerings of Shmini Atzeres, right? That they different from the others of Sukkot. In other words, there's only one single bull that was offered on Shmini Atzeres, different to the rest of Sukkot. And shir, that there was a special shir Lamnatzech ala Shminis that was said on Shmini Atzeres. And bracha was that they gave a bracha to the king on the last day of Yom Tov. But it's only with regards to those six things that we say that it's a regel b'fnei atzmai. Avol le'inyan tashlumin. But with regards to tashlumin, we say tashlumin derishinu, that is still considered to be part of the tashlumin for the first day of Sukkot. Titznan, as we've learned in a Mishnah. It says in a Mishnah, Misha leichag b'Yom Tov Rishon shel Chag. Somebody didn't offer up the Talmud Chagiga on the first day of Yom Tov. Then what's his takana? What can he do? It says Chagig es kol haregel v'Yom Tov ha'achron. He can offer it up throughout the festival and even on the last day of Yom Tov, meaning the day of Shmini Atzeres, the Yom Tov ha'achron. So then, if that's the case, our question reverts back to what we asked initially, that why are you learning that Shavuos is compared to Pesach, and therefore you only have 7 days of compensation of Tashlumin? Why didn't you learn it out from Sukkot, which is also next to it? It's on the other side of it. And to say that just like Sukkot has 8 days for Tashlumin, so too Shavuos would also have 8 days. Yeah, understand the question? And for the Gemara, very important principle in life. Tafasta maruba loy tafasta. When you try to seize too much, which means in this context, when you have two ways of learning something, you can go in both directions. One is to learn more, and the other is to learn less. So then if you try to grab onto the more, loy tafasta, you haven't really held onto it. Why? Because people could come along and say to you, how do you know that it's this one? Maybe it's that one. And therefore you haven't really... A second, somebody's trying to get in and I don't know how to admit him. I don't know why it's not working. I don't know. I don't know what happened. I can't let him in. Apologize. Anyway, so tafasta maruba loy tafasta. When it comes to so if you try to grab them too much, then you didn't seize anything. Or you haven't properly held on to it. But tafasta mua tafasta. If you come along and you try to take this, learn from the smaller amount, then you're gonna really hold on to it. And the reason why you really hold on to it is because nobody's gonna come along and argue against you, because everybody agrees, right, that we learn it from one of them. So if you go and learn from the lesser one, then everybody's going to say that you held onto it. Okay, and that's why we learn it from Pesach and not from Sukkot. So now we learn that you're learning it between that you're not learning from Shavuos and Sukkos. So then the question we have, the Gemara asks is, hello, Frank the Gemara, so then why does the Torah have it next to Sukkos at all? In other words, what halacha can we learn from the fact that it does appear in the pasuk next to Sukkos? In other words, it says, and when it says all of those three things, we've learned out something already from Pesach, right? So why does the Torah have it next to Sukkos? And for the Gemara, you should know that it's not really, we didn't include Sukkos to learn something from Sukkos for Shavuos, but rather la'akushe l'chag hamatzis. We're trying to compare Sukkos to the festival of Chag HaMatzos. Ma Chag HaMatzos to'on lino, just like the festival of Pesach requires staying overnight in Yerushalayim after the first day of Yom Tov. In other words, Motzei Chag, as soon as Yom Tov goes out, you could not go back to your house, but rather you would have to stay overnight in Yerushalayim, and only the next morning you could go back. So too, Av Chag Sukkos Ta'anina. So too, when it comes to the festival of Sukkos, you need to stay overnight in Yerushalayim, and that's why it says B'Chag HaMatzos, B'Chag HaShavuos, B'Chag HaSukkos. We include Chag HaSukkos in that pasuk to have a hekesh between Chag HaMatzos and Chag HaSukkos, to tell you that you need to sleep overnight. Frag the Gemara. But 1 second. How do you know that on Pesach it's required? In other words, you're saying you're learning it out. You're learning Sukkot from Pesach. But how do I know with regards to Pesach that one has to stay overnight? We now turn to Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, and for the Gemara, because it's written. Says that in the morning you may turn back and go to your tents. Now, what does it say in the pasuk? It says that you shall roast the Pesach offering and eat it in the place that Hashem will choose, and in the morning you can go back to your tents. Now, obviously, it can't be talking about Yom Tov itself, because Yom Tov itself, right? Yom Tov itself, you have the Isser of Tchum Shabbos, right? And which applies to Yom Tov as well. So therefore, that's what Rashi says. Look at the top Rashi. It's got to be the next day. So because the Ilu Yom Tov, Tchumen also, you cannot travel the Tchumen. So therefore, it cannot be speaking about when you wake up in the morning on Pesach and you go and you bring up your offering, then in that morning you can go back home. You can't go back home. So it must be talking about the next morning. So this is where we learn that you have to stay overnight in Yom Tov. And when it says you go in the morning back home, it means when it says you go back in the morning home, it's referring to the first day of Chol HaMoed. And so it means you have to sleep overnight in Yerushalayim. So to my sukkahs, you have to sleep overnight in Yerushalayim. Okay. We said that that when it comes to Shavuos, the 7 days, Tashlumin. So says the Gemara Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah Atzeres Shechol is Erev Shabbos, when Shavuos falls out on Friday. Beis Shammai says Yom Tavoyach Achar Shabbos, that the day of the slaughter is after Shabbos, which means on Sunday. Beis Hillel says Ein Lo Yom Tavoyach. We don't have a day of slaughter when it comes to Shavuos. Frank the Gemara, my love, Ein Lo Yom Tavoyach Klal. What does Beis Hillel mean? Does Beis Hillel come along mean that it has no Yom Tavoyach at all? If you're telling me it has no Yom Tov at all, then you're telling me that there's no Tashlumin. You understand? You're saying there's no Tashlumin B'chlal. You're not able to compensate. It sounds like from Beis Hillel, right? If Ein Yom Tov on the day after Shabbos means that you cannot compensate on that day, then perhaps Hillel is saying that there's no such thing as Tashlumin at all. And for the Gemara, no, that's not. What Hillel is saying is that you don't need a Yom Tavoyach. According to Beis Shammai, it's called Yom Tavoyach because it's absolutely necessary. There's no other day prior to that to bring up the carbon, because on Yom Tov you can't bring up an oila, right? And if you hadn't done smicha, for the tashlumin, then you wouldn't be able to bring up the shlomim either. So therefore, you need to have a yom tovayach. Beis Hillel saying when he says ein yom tovayach, it doesn't mean that there isn't one, meaning that there's no tashlumin at all. If you were an oinus or whatever it is, you weren't able to bring it up, that you can't bring it up after yom tov. What he's saying is that you don't need a yom tovayach designated like Beis Shammai says. Frank the Gemara, oh my kamash malan. If that's the interpretation of what Hillel's saying, so what's he teaching us? And the makrivin b'yayme that we may bring it, meaning the carbon, the oilas re'iyah on Shavuos itself. If ligo bo chadazimna, Beis Hillel and Shammai have already argued over this thing before, right? The Tanan, as we learned in our Mishnah, Beis Shammai Emrim Mevin Shlomin Vein Simchen Alein Avol Loi Oilois Beis Hillel Mevin Shlomin Ve'Oilois V'Simchen Alein. So in the beginning of our Mishnah, we already have this machlekes. Beis Shammai says his opinion, and Beis Hillel gives his opinion that you can bring the Oilois and you can do Simchen Alein. So why do you need to come along afterwards and tell me that there's no Yom Tovayach to tell me that you don't need it? You've already mentioned that at the beginning of the Mishnah. And for the Gemara, tzricha. No, we do need it. In other words, Beis Hillel is not telling me that there's no tashlum at all. It's just telling us that we don't need to have a designated Yom Tovayach. Why? Why is it necessary to teach both cases, the beginning of the Mishnah and the end of the Mishnah? Because if the Tana of our Mishnah had only taught us about the first case where Yom Tov falls out on any weekday other than Friday, then Bahak Amr Beis Shammai, I might think that in this case Beis Shammai says that the festival offerings may not be brought on Yom Tov, right? Mishum de'efshel lamachar, because it can be brought right away, the very next day. Aval hacha over her, in this case, where it does fall on Friday, maybe I would think that Beis Shammai would agree to Beis Hillel that the oilas re'iyah can be offered up on Yom Tov because he can't bring it right on the day after, and so therefore I need to have the second case in the Mishnah. Now the iyashmin bahah, but if the Tana of the Mishnah had only told us about when Yom Tov falls out on Friday, right? So then I might think, it's only in this case that Beis Hillel says that the offerings may be brought on Yom Tov because he doesn't want to have it to be postponed to Sunday, because you're not able to bring it up the next day. But over here, in this first case of the Mishnah, where it falls out on any day of the week, maybe we're going to say, maybe he would agree to Beis Shammai that the oilas re'iyah cannot be brought on Yom Tov. Tzricha, that's why it's necessary to teach both disputes of the Mishnah, because I wouldn't have automatically understood one if I from the other. Yeah, so far so good. Any questions? Okay. That's the Gemara further. Again, we're trying to perhaps refute what Rabbi Shia says, right? About the 7 days of Tashlumin, Toshima. Let us come and hear from a Brisa. Mi shaloi Chag Shivas Imei Pesach, whoever did not offer up a Chagiga during the 7th days of Pesach, Ushmoinas Imei Chag, or the 8 days of Sukkot, V'Yom Tov Rishon Shel Atzeres, and the first day of Yom Tov of Shavuos, Shuv Einei Chagig, he can no longer offer up the Korban Chagiga. And now, Frank the Gemara, my love, Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. What's the story of Shavuos? Is it not the first day? Isn't that the actual day of Shavuos itself? I'm sorry, 1 second. Again, do the Bryce again. Pesach, some of you didn't offer Chagiga on the first days of Pesach, the 7 days of Pesach, and the 7th day of and the 8 days of Sukkot, the Yom Tov shall Atzeres, or the Yom Tov of Shavuos, Shuvei Chagig. He no longer offers the Chagiga. My love, Yom Tov shel Atzeres. Is it not the actual festival of Shavuos and the Gemara? No, Yom Tov Vayach. It's referring to the day of slaughter. In other words, I'm not sure what this means. I'm gonna have to go over this and try and understand what this means. So Misa Hashem will pick up tomorrow from this Bryce again. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what he's saying over here. So I'll come back to you tomorrow, Misa Hashem, with a better understanding of what's going on over here. But anyway, I wish you all a wonderful day.
You
Thank
too.
you all for
Thank you
joining.
very much,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
And I'll see you again tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem. Same time, same place.
Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.